Hi, welcome to After Hours. With me today is Jodie Emery. Jodie is a marijuana activist. She is co-owner of the Cannabis Culture magazine and Pot TV. Welcome to the show, Jodie.
Thanks for having me, Don.
So I wanted to start off just basically getting a little bit of history as to how you got involved with activism and the Cannabis Culture magazine.
Well, in high school, I was a leadership student and a teacher's pet, and I was very much against marijuana. So
You were actually against marijuana?
Against it. I was against drinking. I was against teenagers having sex. I was very much like a authoritarian type figure. And then my friends, who were my best friends, started smoking pot, and I gave them a very hard time about it. But they began reading Cannabis Culture magazine and watching Pot TV, one of the first video websites online, and I began to question everything I had been told about marijuana and then about everything. So I got involved as a teenager, and I moved to Vancouver in 2004 to work with Mark Emery and Cannabis Culture magazine.
How did you meet Mark?
I was online on the online forums, so my friends had introduced me to the magazine in print, and there was also the internet at that time with forums. So I joined up and I was able to engage with others, and Mark was always on there talking with anyone about marijuana. So that's how I initially made contact. I moved to Vancouver in 2004 to go to school for broadcast journalism, actually, but then I got involved in the activism and ran for the BC Marijuana Party in 2005 and became editor of the magazine in 2005 as well, and married Mark in 2006. So the rest is history.
Right. And you just recently, like in the last election, you were a candidate. You were nominated as a candidate, but
Well, I
you
was
didn't.
seeking the nomination to be a candidate.
Oh, okay.
So in Vancouver East, the Liberals there had pretty much always given up on that riding. It was Libby Davies with the NDP. She's phenomenal. I have nothing but huge respect for her. And so I thought running for the Liberal Party in that riding would be a good opportunity to educate people about legalization, especially given that the Liberals had adopted it as part of their party platform, given they voted on it in 2012. So I figured legalization, I'm pretty much an advocate and expert in that. So I spent a year campaigning in 2014, hoping to be the candidate. Ultimately, the party did select another person, and that's fine because it enabled me to focus on the rest of my activism and advocacy.
Were you disappointed or were you glad?
I was a little disappointed at first, as anybody is when they get rejected for something they're seeking. But again, it was mostly an activism campaign. To be honest, when Libby Davies announced her retirement midway through my nomination campaign, I thought, oh no, this is going to get really serious now, because it was not really understood as a riding you could win. So I get why the Liberals did what they did, and it again enabled me to focus on my business and the rest of my activism without getting caught up in shaking hands and kissing babies.
Right. You also ran for the Green Party.
Yes, twice I've run in 2009 and 2013, and I was the policing and crime critic and the Olympic critic back in 2009.
Okay. And do you plan to run for the Green Party again?
I've had conversations about it, and I fully support the BC Green Party. I'm still a member, I still donate, and I'm very proud to be a BC Green member and former candidate. I might run again, but it also depends on what kind of other opportunities and obligations might come up. And given that legalization is being promised a year from now or next April, I think I might have a lot on my plate when we're working with trying to get the best legalization possible. There's also the consideration that now I am openly breaking the law by using civil disobedience to sell marijuana through our stores to all adults for personal reasons, whether they be sick or healthy. I'm not going to discriminate. So I can understand that a political party might hesitate to have a front-line candidate who is in a position like I am. But again, the BC Green Party was one of the first parties to endorse ending prohibition, and they've always been supportive of that, so I support them in return. And maybe it's time for someone to run for office and maybe even win when they're a cannabis advocate and expert and provider of this wonderful plant.
One of the things I was thinking about was, like, okay, right now the NDP is saying, well, you should have decriminalized, and whereas the Liberals are saying, well, legalize it. How do you feel about, is that?
That's a doozy, because for beginners, Justin Trudeau was initially in favor of decriminalization only. He said that he didn't want to legalize it, he only wanted to decriminalize it so people like his late brother wouldn't get arrested and charged for pot possession. So he made it very clear that the penalties for pot were doing more harm to people than pot itself. And then the Liberals voted to legalize marijuana at their convention. And I think he was in a difficult position because he had actually voted in favor of mandatory minimum prison time for pot introduced by the Harper government. So some people, including my husband, called him a hypocrite, especially given that he admits to using marijuana himself as a member of parliament illegally and trafficking it by passing it. So Trudeau decided he had to support legalization in full because that's what the party agreed upon. And for some strange reason, or maybe just partisan politics, he decided to stop advocating for decriminalization, which means not arresting the user. And he said that we need to continue arresting Canadians for marijuana. Now, this flies in the face of his first comments about how criminal records are doing harm and costing society. And it also shows that he's actually maintaining the status quo. So he says he wants to legalize it, but really his actions show that he's no better than Harper. And in fact, with all of the raids that have been taking place, Stephen Harper may have been even better for the marijuana movement than we see Justin Trudeau being.
I'm wondering why he didn't stop the raids.
Well, I think it's actually because he's told the police to go ahead and raid places. The Liberal government, including Bill Blair, who's in charge of legalization, and Jane Philpott, the health minister, and Jody Wilson-Raybould, the justice minister, all of them have been saying very loudly and clearly, including Ralph Goodale, public safety minister, they said the law is in effect and the law must be enforced, and we encourage the police to enforce the law. Basically, when we had...
So why don't they arrest themselves?
Exactly. So,
yeah.
Right. Will Trudeau go up and put his hands up for handcuffs first? I mean, if he doesn't, then he is a hypocrite. How dare he get away with it while he sends young people to jail and to court for the same thing? So this hypocrisy is really becoming clear. And what worries a lot of people is that, you know, again, nothing is changing. The Liberals keep saying they're going to legalize it, but really, they're just putting the legalization label on the prohibition policy, which means arresting people, continuing to enforce the law, continuing to deprive people of their rights to travel and have jobs and go to school. I mean, everything they're doing signals a worsening of pot policy. And it's really offensive when they say it's legalization when clearly they're doing more harm than we've seen before.
Well, I take it you're not happy with the current federal task force on pot then?
Not happy at all. I did request to have a role on the task force because it became very clear from the beginning that the government is only listening to the former opponents of legalization. You know, we've always had the police and the mental health experts. They're always talking about the dangers and keep it illegal. And now they're the ones who are being asked to draft marijuana legalization policy. So
yeah,
it's like taking a homophobic priest and saying, how about you draft gay marriage legislation? Why would you go to that guy, right?
Yeah,
He's the one who's been against it. So for the marijuana movement, we felt that an advocate or expert should be included.
Exactly.
So I requested an official role, and the health minister didn't rule it out. But the next day, Bill Blair said no, even though he asked me personally, in person, to be in conversations with him. So I haven't heard anything from the task force yet. And they're going to be coming to town here on September 2nd. They're holding a consultation, but it is private, and they've only invited a few people, and I'm not one of them. So I'll be out front protesting, as we've had to do for decades now.
But if you were on the task force, what things would you like to talk about?
I want to focus on how prohibition itself has actually harmed society in almost immeasurable ways. First of all, you have second-class citizens all across this country. That includes Canadians of all races, ages, and backgrounds being saddled with a criminal record that prevents travel, prevents job opportunities. Some people lose their homes, their kids, their scholarships. I mean, there are millions, over 2 million Canadians since the 60s who have received criminal records for cannabis. This is something that's far safer than alcohol or tobacco, which people consume every day and which the government financially benefits from. So the injustice of arresting people, giving them criminal records, and denying them their equal opportunity, that to me is the biggest concern. I care very much about the medical marijuana patients, but they are able to get access through some means, even though it is a struggle and many of them are denied access. But marijuana prohibition has to end because it's one of the greatest civil rights violations we've ever seen. It keeps a lot of people from being able to contribute to society. And not only that, it costs billions to enforce. In British Columbia, in 1 year alone, we spent $10.5 million on pot possession cases. Imagine all the rest of the money on growing and trafficking and everything else.
Do we have figures that About people that are petty possession.
Yeah. Well, a large number of people who are arrested are just for simple possession. And in fact, 25% of all arrests are young people under the age of 19, I believe. So these are young people who are going to have lifelong repercussions because of the law, not because of the cannabis itself, but because of the law enforcement. I'm always reminded of a young girl in town here. Her father had raised this issue in the news because she was going to go to the United States with her church group to feed the homeless, to volunteer and feed the homeless. And she was stopped at the border because at some point a police officer had been suspicious of her and her friends in a park, thinking maybe they smoked pot. And he didn't find any weed and they didn't have any, and he just made a note that this girl and her friends may have been smoking marijuana. And then she got denied at the border with her church group and couldn't feed the homeless. So this is the law doing far more harm than even if she had been smoking pot in the park. I mean, it wouldn't have harmed anybody, and now she's being denied her ability to contribute. So for me, it's the idea that many Canadians are being denied their rights because of a law that costs billions to enforce, and there are some numbers into it. We're looking at maybe 70% of police budgets are used for marijuana or marijuana-related enforcement, and that is an enormous number, especially when we're suffering for lack of funds with healthcare and everything else.
Well, back to the panel now. We're talking about legalization, but it seems like we're going backwards, doesn't it? It seems like they're saying, well, we're going to severely punish those that give pot to children, those that drive under the influence, and those that don't work under the regulatory framework, we're going to punish them. So this is very draconian legislation
it's
coming
like
forward.
Prohibition with a new name. I mean, you can have prohibition through over-regulation. So when we say legalize it, we didn't really mean regulate it out of existence, because that's what prohibition is. Prohibition is a set of laws designed to like restrict something entirely. So the Liberals now are using all this language of restrict and limit access, and people must be going, well, how are you going to legalize it? If you introduce tougher penalties, how is it legal? If you punish people for operating outside the legal system, how is it legal? In what way is this legal? And so now we're getting bogged down in where the devil lies, that's in the details. And for many places, including Washington and Colorado, they pass legalization with a lot of regulations, but they find out which regulations are good and which are bad. So our government, unfortunately, has given up entirely on their consultations. The Liberals were sending representatives to investigate Colorado, Uruguay, Amsterdam, Portugal. There are a lot of places to go, and they went there. And now they've come back, and for some reason, they're ignoring every other example and going with the prohibition we've already had. So it does worry me that all of this task force talk is very prohibitionist in its nature. And we're just going to see more and more people being arrested, more and more raids, billions of dollars being spent on more law enforcement. And I ask why? For what purpose? Who benefits? And nobody can answer that. And really the only ones benefiting are the people who see marijuana as competition. You've got the pharmaceutical companies who have data showing that marijuana users reduce their dependence on pills. You've got many examples of alcohol companies looking at how marijuana use reduces alcohol consumption, and they don't like that. So you've got all these special interest groups who are really pushing a lot of prohibitionist language, trying to keep it the way it's always been. And for me, that's not acceptable, and I'm dedicated to ending this prohibition.
Well, there has been some Supreme Court challenges that we've won on some areas there. Medical marijuana users can cultivate their own marijuana.
Yeah.
They are able to use extracts and edibles. They've said that, but there's a lot of problem around those.
Oh yeah. Well, even those court decisions came about out of confusion. So many medical marijuana patients would like to grow their own, but they need permission from a doctor under the system that we've got. And many doctors are not comfortable. So even though this access is available, it's only available to some, not all. And that's why there have been many constitutional challenges that have won in court, because the access is not available to all. Now, the government just recently introduced new medical marijuana regulations again, and unfortunately, they're very much like the first the first laws that Harper put in place.
Right.
So we're not really seeing much progress because many of the problems that existed before are just right back in our faces again. So this is the government trying to introduce regulations to satisfy the demands of the courts, but they're still not going the full way. They're still not giving as much as they can. And when you mentioned tinctures and the ability for patients to legally use edibles and extracts, that was because of a court challenge that won. And in fact, all of our medical marijuana laws and all of our law reform have come about through breaking the law.
Right.
Some people say, you know, stop doing all of this, stop breaking the law, wait until it's legal.
Yeah, and we've been waiting for years.
For decades
Yes.
and decades, and many people have died and gone to prison, and so I'm saying no more waiting. Would you have told women to just wait for the right to vote? Would you have told any other group just to wait for their freedom? No. You have to push and fight for it because government has always tried to withhold those rights, and it's only through breaking the law, civil disobedience, going to court, getting arrested, changing the law through court decisions. That's the only way we've made any change in this country. And the Liberals, unfortunately, have a very long record of actually obstructing medical marijuana access. Even Anne McClellan, who's in charge of the task force, has a history of saying that marijuana is a scourge and it's dangerous. And she works for the lawyers that represent the licensed producers. So there's so many conflicts of interest here. It almost gets conspiratorial sounding, but it's just basic facts.
Well, I just wonder if she drinks or not because
exactly, there's more hypocrisy there. And even coffee, you know, coffee is an addictive stimulant drug, and we all enjoy it, and we don't give it to children, and everybody's fine.
So is there a future for the storefront dispensary?
There should be, there must be, and in fact, many people will not give up until there is. You know, we often look at legalization and wonder what should it be like, where can you use it, where can you buy it, who gets to buy it? My answer is,
I just find it odd that in the past you had to go to the park or you had to get it off the street or get it at the arcade or
wait for a guy to be like, you need some weed, and it's like, God, I'll
thinking,
take whatever you can get.
You're taking this off the street. Isn't that making it safer for children? So why do you think they oppose the storefront?
The government,
won't that just be creating a black market?
Exactly. The government does not want marijuana to be normalized. The Liberals have used this language. They said, we do not want marijuana to be normalized. We do not want it to be an economic growth engine. We don't want it to contribute to society. And everyone must be shaking their heads, why?
So why don't we just go back to prohibition with alcohol then? Why don't we just, if
ban
we're
it all?
trying to save the kids, then let's stop drinking alcohol.
And the hypocrisy, that's what's so maddening. And you know, I even saw Trudeau being interviewed by, who was it? It was Mulroney's son. And he was saying, well, why are you still arresting people for pot? And Trudeau ignores the question entirely and goes, we have to stop the gangs and protect the kids. And it's like, wait a minute, where's your gray cut hair? Because you sound like Harper.
Yeah.
You know, he's just nonstop focusing on these fear-mongering messages. And again, I ask why? For whose benefit? And we marijuana activists have been doing this for so long. We're sick and tired of waiting, and so are Canadians. That's why storefronts are popular. It's supply and demand. It's not a bunch of Mexican cartel members coming up here and grabbing kids off the street and making them buy pot. It's not. It's a lot of elderly people looking for a brownie to help them sleep at night so they don't have to take a pill. That's a huge part of the marijuana market, and that's why these dispensaries are so popular. And I encourage everybody who's involved in the industry to be brave and to not close and to not buckle, because we know who the aggressors are. It's the men with the guns who come in to shut us down. We're not the bad people. We're the ones helping people.
How many jobs do you think are being lost in Vancouver?
Oh,
we have something like 187 dispensaries.
Oh, yeah.
Was that the final?
Nearly 200,
Nearly
and
200.
each dispensary can employ between 5 to 15 people, upwards to 20.
How many jobs do you think are actually?
Thousands of jobs are
Well,
at stake.
at least 1,000.
At least 1,000, but
Yeah.
we're talking about an industry that includes.
I'm talking about Vancouver here.
Oh, Vancouver
Yeah.
alone,
Yeah.
enormous numbers, because you have people growing it, packaging, transporting, and if we were able to go legal, we could actually have jobs out in the open with marketing, branding. I was just in Washington for the first time since I helped legalize it, and I bought legal marijuana for the very first time, and I was overwhelmed by the fact that this store was packed with people and pounds of pot in bags and pre-rolled joints, and it was beautifully marketed, and nobody was being harmed, and I thought, why not here? Why not everywhere? Now,
and how much were you paying for a gram?
oh, that was like $10 for a joint, and the joint wasn't even a full gram. So like,
I've heard a
the
few
prices
things
are
about
inflated.
the prices aren't
And
too
that's
great.
the problem, because they
That's a big problem.
over-regulated it. Yes.
If they do that, then you've just got a black market.
There is still the black market. That's
Yeah.
right. And the government doesn't seem to be able to wrap their head around the fact that if you prohibit it and you increase the risk, then you increase the reward. So, you know, if it's risky to be involved in pot, you can demand a lot more for your product. But if the risk goes down, the price has to come down. Pot should be pennies per gram. Canadians have a great history of farming in hemp and cannabis and agriculture. We should be growing hemp not only for the cannabis medicine it provides through CBD oil, which is really good for kids. To be honest, it's helping a lot of kids. But we have many opportunities available in agriculture. You can build houses out of hemp. You can even reverse climate change because hemp absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. We can make clothing out of hemp. You could replace paper. We could stop deforestation.
Hemp seed is high in antioxidants.
Omega, antioxidants
yeah.
and omega fatty acids.
Yes.
So we can stop overfishing and start replacing fish with hemp to use the really great fatty acids. I mean, it's the best seed. I mean, I could go on forever about hemp. You could give me 5 hours and I could tell you everything about it. But the fact is that this is not just some neutral, benign thing like blueberries. You know, if the government banned blueberries, well, okay, then pay a lot for blueberries. But cannabis actually helps save lives. It's really helping people. And whether or not there's scientific data to prove that one patient is having an improved life because of cannabis, it doesn't matter. It's about our individual experience. And we all know that Western medicine, pharmaceutical medicines, opioids, addictive painkillers, they're causing enormous destruction and devastation across this country, and cannabis is helping people get off of those painkillers. So it can help save lives, and if the government continues to prohibit it, they're actively preventing the saving of lives. It's that simple.
Well, I see, you know, it's not legalization without the right to cultivate.
Exactly, the right to grow your own. I mean, people can grow their own tobacco.
Why would you go out and pay $20 for a gram, you know?
Exactly.
You can grow it for like,
well, and people can, you know, you can do it really cheap. You can do it really cheaply. And we can look at other industries too. A lot of people are growing their own food, but the majority of them still go to a store, although a great number of them will go to a farmer's market. You know, some people want to just buy cheap groceries and some people want to buy heirloom tomatoes. We have to have freedom of choice. And that's what this activism has always really been about. It's about free to choose to do what we want as long as we aren't harming others. And with all of these dispensary raids out in Toronto and the overregulation and ticketing here in Vancouver, we're seeing that they're doing more harm than good. And cannabis is helping more people than it's harming. So again, we have to ask, who are the aggressors here? Who are the bad guys? If there's a bad guy in this equation, it's not the cannabis dispensary operators. It's the people trying to shut them down.
well, there's competition out there. There's big companies like Tilray that are wanting to do it through the mail.
Yeah.
And
Well, they actually want storefronts too.
they do want storefronts. Oh,
you know,
okay, I did not realize that.
Well, and you know, we have a tendency in our activism movement to kind of group these big corporate producers together. Basically what happened is the Harper government was ordered by the courts to provide marijuana. So they allowed a few companies to do it, but they had to pay millions of dollars, huge security, background checks for criminals, like all sorts of intense hurdles. And many people thought, well, I'm going to jump through those hoops because the payoff at the end looks pretty great. And then they jumped through all these hoops, and now they're finding, wait a minute, you know, it's not actually that great at all because everybody else is choosing the illegal dispensaries rather than ordering legal weed through the mail.
And $30,000 for a business license sounds
it's discriminatory and punitive. It's designed to shut down businesses. I mean, nobody freaked out when coffee shops sprung up everywhere, or fresh pressed juices, or craft beer for that matter. Beer is alcohol, and alcohol causes a lot of devastation, and nobody went crazy about all these craft breweries popping up. We embraced them. We encouraged them to add jobs and to create growth for the community. So marijuana dispensaries are being treated in the opposite way. And it's completely unfair given that alcohol is given a free pass all the time. So all of these hurdles for the licensed producers under the Health Canada program, to the dispensaries being asked to pay a lot of money, these rules are designed to shut down these businesses, and that's why they're unconstitutional. That's why the court has said that you need dispensaries in order to provide enough access. We're still in that gray zone, which means a lot of people are still going to be arrested, and a lot of other people are still going to be trying to control the market or have a monopoly or oligopoly.
We're quickly running out of time, so if somebody wants to get in touch with you and find out more information, how do they go about doing that?
Well, our news website is cannabisculture.com, and it was a print magazine for many years, but my name is Jodie Emery, Jodie If you go to Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, anywhere online, just Google my name, Jodie Emery, and you'll get everything I have to say.
Well, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much,
Appreciate you coming out, and thanks for watching.